There have been many things in the news. There was the Pennsylvania clergy sex abuse bomb that went off this week. A grand jury report detailing the abuse of more than 1,000 children by more than 300 priests over the years. And there are probably vastly more. This sort of thing is underreported, as we all know, and also sedulously covered up by the church. In fact, it's not much of an exaggeration to say that the Catholic Church is a machine, one of whose primary functions has been to ensure that children get raped and that the world doesn't find out about it. This really is not an exaggeration. That reminded me of an article I wrote about 10 years ago when a similar scandal happened in Ireland. I wrote an article titled Bringing the Vatican to Justice. Actually, I may have read this on a much earlier podcast, but I'll just read the first two paragraphs here because it's really all I have to say in the present case. And it makes a point that I think is all too rarely made. So here's what I wrote, I think in 2009 or so. I've paid too little attention to the sexual abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. Frankly, it has always felt unsportsmanlike to shoot so large and languorous a fish in so tiny a barrel, and there seemed to be no need to deride faith at its most vulnerable and self-abased. Even in retrospect, it is easy to understand the impulse to avert one's eyes. Just imagine a pious mother and father sending their beloved child to the church of 1,000 hands for spiritual instruction, only to have him raped and terrified into silence by threats of hell. Then imagine this occurring to tens of thousands of children in our own time, and to children beyond reckoning for over 1,000 years. The spectacle of faith so utterly misplaced and so fully betrayed is simply too depressing to think about. But there was always more to this phenomenon that should have compelled my attention. Consider the ludicrous ideology that made it possible. The Catholic Church has spent 2 millennia demonizing human sexuality to a degree unmatched by any other institution, declaring the most basic, healthy, mature, and consensual behavior as taboo. Indeed, this organization still opposes the use of contraception, preferring instead that the poorest people on earth be blessed with the largest families and the shortest lives. As a consequence of this hallowed and incorrigible stupidity, the Church has condemned generations of decent people to shame and hypocrisy, or to Neolithic fecundity, poverty, and death by AIDS. Add to this inhumanity the artifice of cloistered celibacy, and you now have an institution, one of the wealthiest on earth, that preferentially attracts pederasts, pedophiles, and sexual sadists into its ranks, promotes them to positions of authority, and grants them privileged access to children. Finally, consider that vast numbers of children will be born out of wedlock, and their unwed mothers vilified, wherever church teaching holds sway, leading boys and girls by the thousands to be abandoned to church-run orphanages, only to be raped and terrorized by the clergy. Here in this ghoulish machinery set whirling through the ages by the opposing winds of shame and sadism, we mortals can finally glimpse how strangely perfect are the ways of the Lord. Okay, so that's how I opened that article. But let's be clear about what's happening here. This isn't just the law of large numbers, where you sample hundreds of thousands or millions of people and you find some thousands of them abusing children. There's something special about the Catholic Church. Okay, there's a specific machinery here, based on dogmatism and faith in ridiculous ideas. And every detail matters, like the belief in hell and sin and celibacy and the shame of out-of-wedlock birth. Of course, there are other religious communities that have abused their kids and conceal the crime so as not to bring embarrassment to the institutions. There have been scandals among the Orthodox Jews in New York in recent years. But no one has perfected this horror show like the Catholic Church. This is an institution that routinely spends millions of dollars to protect individual priests who they know have raped children for decades, moving them from one parish to the next where they can rape again, paying hush money to victims, and when these cases wind up in court, doing everything they can to shame and discredit the children or the adults who were once those children. This is pure evil, and the details are insane. I'm just going to read you a snippet from the Pennsylvania grand jury report. Okay, this is a quote. Despite a priest's admission to assaulting at least a dozen young boys, the bishop wrote to thank him for, quote, all the good you have done for God's people. The Lord, who sees in private, will reward, end quote. Another priest confessed to anal and oral rape of at least 15 boys, as young as 7. The bishop later met with the abuser to commend him as a, quote, person of candor and sincerity, and to compliment him for, quote, the progress he has made in controlling his, quote, addiction. When the abuser was finally removed from the priesthood years later, the bishop ordered the parish not to say why. Quote, nothing else need be noted, end quote. It says further down here in the report, we came across a file in which the diocese candidly conceded that this, quote, is one of our worst cases, end quote, but of course told no one about him. Actually, we came across the statement in the files of several other priests. Then there was the file with a simple celebratory notation, quote, bad abuse case. Victim sued us. We won. There was the priest, for example, who raped a 7-year-old girl after she'd had her tonsils out. This is me now. This girl was raped in her hospital room. Just picture the life of this person, okay, in the context of a faith so captivating that there was no recourse here. Picture the family around this girl. You get indoctrinated from birth into a cult, and this is a cult staffed with an inordinate number of pedophiles who gain access to your kids. Back to the report. Or the priest who made a 9-year-old give him oral sex and then rinsed out the boy's mouth with holy water to purify him. Or the boy who drank some juice at his priest's house and woke up the next morning bleeding from his rectum, unable to remember anything about the night before. Okay, so that's as much as I'll give you. Sorry to ambush you with that, but it's hard even for me to pay attention to this stuff and remember how horrible these details are. None of this should be surprising. This is in the DNA of this organization. If you had to sign a user agreement for the Catholic Church, this should be part of it. Somewhere in the fine print, it should say, the ideology of our organization acts as a filter attracting sexually confused and conflicted and conscienceless men, and we employ these people and hide their crimes, and we've done this for over 1,000 years. Now give us your kids. Hearing that the Catholic Church is raping children should be as surprising as hearing that Google and Facebook are selling your data to third parties. Anyway, it's intense to read about all this. You're getting me just after I did that, hence the top spin. Imagine if there were a Fortune 500 company that was raping and abusing children for its entire existence and systematically concealing it. What would we have done to that company? And now, consider what hasn't happened to the Catholic Church.